Hey, this is B from KongsRUs, and check out this cool magic trick. Perfectly balanced big buck hunter guns with awesome clicking triggers. Wanna mod these too? I'll show you how it's done. Let's go. When I got my big buck world, the first thing I did was pull out the gun to check out the quality. I was super excited to see Arcade1Up's first attempt at a light gun cap, and when I finally held them in my hands for the first time, I was definitely disappointed. It felt a little cheap, almost like a toy gun from the 99-cent store, and immediately I had concerns that they could potentially break. Then I got a message from a community member, Hone, that sent me pics of his big buck guns arriving broken straight out the box. The guns are packed on the side of the box, so be careful when you open yours and check them, but this is when I knew I wanted to mod the guns to make them better and stronger. To start, I had to figure out how to open the guns, so after removing the 21 screws on the gun, the most difficult part to remove was the cap. The orange gun's cap was glued on super tight, and on my first attempt I had to use two small watch knives with flat edges to wedge into the sides and loosen it enough to pull off. However, this left visible stress sparks on my cap. But with my green gun, I started by trying to wiggle the cap back and forth, was eventually able to twist and pull off the cap, so I highly recommend doing this first. Once you remove the screws and cap, you can slowly start to pull apart the two gun halves. I recommend using a watch knife or something small and flat that you can use to pry the sections of the gun apart slowly. There are some areas that are still glued, so be cautious. Let's look at how the trigger mechanics work. There's a small spring to provide a little extra tension for the trigger, so be careful when opening the gun. The trigger fits snugly over the spring, and when pulling the trigger, you can see the second orange L-shaped piece actually pressing the blue and black micro switch. For the pump section, you can see when moving the green fore end, it's pulling a smaller green piece connected to a spring. And when cocked all the way back, the fore end moves another green piece that actually presses the micro switch. Now let's look at the webcam, which is protected by a small piece of plastic up front. And the webcam is labeled Gun 2, which is how it registers on your PC as a webcam. This is connected to a small circuit board which has two inputs for the micro switches on the pump and trigger. Now let's look at the stock micro switches, which when pressed doesn't provide any tactile clicking feedback, and I wasn't a fan when I first pressed the stock triggers. Luckily, I found the perfect replacement clicking micro switches inside these Sanwa Clone Buttons I got from DIY Retro. These high quality off-brand Sanwas use the exact same micro switches as the guns, but have that satisfying click that I was looking for. To remove the micro switch from the button, use a small flathead screwdriver and pry out the top part of the push button. Then carefully press the tabs on the back of the switch with your flathead to dislodge it. And now you can test out that sweet, satisfying clicking micro switch. Next, we need to replace the stock micro switches, so carefully lift out each one with a small flathead screwdriver, and then I recommend using that same flathead to help loosen the encoder wire before pulling it off the micro switch. Use a pair of pliers on the connection points to make sure they aren't loose when you attach them to the new micro switch. Next, reattach the same wires to the clicking micro switch and replace exactly in the same place you pulled out. It shouldn't matter which way you replace the wires, but try to keep the same orientation as the stock switch. Now make sure your trigger is working properly, and then listen to that sweet clicking sound. Now as a quick bonus, I want to show you the comparison to the inside of a real arcade big buck hunter gun, as I originally had plans to transplant the guts, however the shaft of the barrel was too small to fit and house the webcam components. It was definitely handy to have a real gun when I was adding the counterweights, so more on that later. So you can repeat the same process to replace the micro switch on the pump, however there is a slight modification needed to the gun before you put it back together. This tab on the inside of the gun helps hold the micro switch in place, however after replacing the clicking micro switch, it causes the pump switch to get stuck in place and not reset. So grab a pair of strong wire cutters and clip off a small piece of that plastic part like this. Before moving on to adding counterweights, I highly recommend reattaching the pump and testing to make sure your switches work properly and move freely for both the trigger and pump. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about balancing the stock guns, and as you can see when I pick up the gun and try to balance it at the handle, it falls forward as it's too front heavy. Remember when I said having a real big buck gun came in handy? Well, watch what happens when I hold the real gun at the handle and see how it's perfectly balanced on my fingers. When opening up the gun, you can see the extra plastic used in the stock for balance, while the Arcade1Up gun is pretty much hollow. Just for more research, the real big buck gun weighs in at just about 1 pound 8 ounces, while the Arcade1Up gun weighs in at 12 ounces, almost half the weight as the real gun. So quick shout out to Zach Schultz, who gave me the idea of adding weights to the guns. Thanks again for the tip and showing me these awesome 1 ounce adhesive weights I got from Amazon, which I'll leave a link in the description below. So at first I experimented adding 12 extra ounces of weight matching the real big buck gun weight at 24 ounces. However, when I tested the balance, it was too back heavy and it didn't feel right. Eventually I found that adding 6 ounces of weight to the stock was the perfect amount. Now check out the balance on the Arcade1Up guns, which feel great, and the weights actually make the stock feel solid and harder. I asked Mrs. KongsRUs to compare the stock green gun versus the weighted orange gun, and she could definitely feel the difference in quality. Thumbs up for the weighted gun for sure. One last quick tip before replacing the gun cap: check the web camera placement to see if it's off-centered when you put your gun back together. If so, use a small flathead to adjust it before finally adding the cap back on. When it's all said and done, you should have 2 perfectly balanced Arcade1Up big buck guns that you can even balance on your fingers. Plus, you'll have some awesome clicking microswitches for both your triggers and both your shotgun pumping actions, so get ready to shoot those bucks. Here's a little bit of gameplay and some final thoughts. The added weight of the gun improves the balance and feel tremendously along with the clicking microswitches. The extra heft really adds a new layer of quality that Arcade1Up guns was previously lacking. I highly recommend these cheap gun mods, as the microswitches are less than $3, the weights are about $15, so for less than $20 you can change your big buck cap and make it feel like $1,000,000. If you haven't seen it yet, check out my 27-inch monitor mod which I added to my cab, so hit that like button, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and taking it to the next level.